personnel rules.
I'm just going to start from the beginning, and
Are folks ready to get started? Good. Okay. Okay. Is the tape ready, Amanda? Okay, I'd like to call to order this work session of the Anchorage Assembly. Our first topic is personnel rules. If we could go around and identify ourselves for the tape, please. Julia, could you start?
Julia Becker, Assembly Council.
Thank you.
Paul Holman, Anchorage Assembly.
Harriet Drummond, Assembly.
Dick Train Assembly.
Elvie Gray Jackson.
Bertie Hall.
Debbie Ossiander.
Herb Wilden, Labor Relations.
Ken Ford, legal.
Dennis Bennett, School Attorney.
Nancy Usera, Employee Relations.
And Ms. Johnston is also with us.
And Mr. Flynn.
And Mr. Flynn.
Don Reeder.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I was talking. Who are you?
I was just about to introduce him.
Thank you.
Herb Wilden is our new Director of Labor Relations. He is replacing Lisa Arnold. Herb comes to us with about an extensive background in labor relations, primarily in the Midwest. And he moved to Alaska here almost a year ago, last September. And we were fortunate enough that the timing it happened nicely. So he has a lot of experience with negotiating contracts and responding to grievances and working with management in the auto industry primarily.
Thank you very much. Nancy, are you going to walk us through this?
Well, I am, and I'm going to have Lisa help me. Come on up, Lisa. Lisa was our project leader on this, and she's been kind enough to come back from her new private sector job to help answer some questions if it gets more technical than I can respond to. I did provide a cover sheet just to put things in context a little bit. We started this project back in March of 2010. We put together a project team that was comprised of employment, benefits, labor relations, personnel, payroll, and legal. And we went through the personnel rules. The personnel rules have not been updated in any material way for over 10 years. There is an obligation to review these and try to keep them up with current practices. We kept in touch with the Human Resources Advisory Board, and the chairman is here with us today. Jacqueline Hofflich is chairman of the Human Resources Advisory Board. She was head of HR at the Anchorage Museum, and they've been a tremendous help in giving us some guidance on the provisions that we've been looking at, and to help us put into context how those provisions compare to what's going on in the private sector and changes in the employment market overall. So they've been engaged with this from the get-go. We've gone back and forth on it. There are some cumbersome procedural requirements, taken longer than we would have liked, but the fact remains we are where we are here. This is intended to be, we went about this project with the intention that this would be phase one of a two-phase project, possibly three, depending on how things come up. And we prioritized this first phase based on cost savings, immediate needs, problems that we've had in terms of clarifications, definitions, that sort of thing. So we prioritized it based on immediate need. There is sort of a laundry list that we put together for phase two that tend to deal with more technical things that are payroll related and how we're doing things and that sort of thing. We hope to launch into phase two as soon as phase one is completed. I also want to thank Assemblyman Hall and Flynn and Bill Starr, who's not here, and Assemblyman Starr for their help in reviewing this with us on behalf of as a subcommittee of the Assembly. So with that, what you have before you is the Assembly memorandum that pretty much describes in detail what is in here. The S version that has gone into paste this week is essentially the same with a number of clarifications, because we got comments back from people saying this was we need to reword this and we need to clarify it. But the big change between the original version and the S version is that we have removed changes to standby pay. We got a lot of feedback from people saying, wait a minute, compensation, I think there was a lot of misunderstanding about what the proposal did. Essentially, right now, under the personnel rules, we compensate people 2 hours a day, regardless of weekends, holidays, and weekdays, if they're required to be on standby, available to be called in. The proposal was to reduce that amount by 1 hour only on weekdays, only on work days. So it still would have been 2 hours on weekends, 2 hours on holidays, but 1 hour during the week. I think there was a lot of misunderstanding about it. We did withdraw that proposal, and we've asked internal audit to assist us with looking at the current uses of standby pay. Where is it? What is the cost? I mean, I can tell you that municipality-wide, we paid $535,000 last year in standby pay. So it certainly is real money, and we want to look at where that money's going. So internal audit will help that with us, and then we'll see whether or not we want to roll it back into phase 2. So with that, Lisa is so experienced at walking through this. I'd be happy to do it, but I'll let her with your permission.
I'll just go ahead and walk through it, and I'll probably go at a rather rapid pace, so if you have questions, just let me know. I will use the AO as the document that I am working from. Many of the things are providing clarification to current practices, current processes, but nowhere was it clearly written as to how that was being done. So base rate of pay is...
Hold on, Ms. Drummond.
Using the AOS version or
S version,
original?
yes,
Okay.
the S version.
Thank you.
Good clarification. Base rate of pay occurs throughout the personnel rules as well as in collective bargaining agreements. And while I would venture to say that there is a good understanding of what base rate of pay is, there was not a definition. So we're providing a definition for base rate of pay. In simplistic terms, base rate is what appears in the wage scale before any type of incentive that may be provided, whether it is a night shift differential, whether it is service recognition, whether it is the old longevity pay. So the base rate of pay is if someone would go to the wage scale and look and say a 14.3 makes $24.75, that's the base rate of pay. We went on then to clarify the definition of factored rate of pay, because that too is used throughout the personnel rules and collective bargaining agreements to say that the factored rate of pay includes pay enhancements. Full-time equivalency is something that is very common not only within the municipality but within many organizations. Employees that are hired at 40 hours a week are hired at a 1.0 full-time equivalency. Holidays, leave accrual, and other various benefits are dependent upon an employee's full-time equivalency. So we're providing a definition that's consistent today with the current practice that full-time employees 40 hours a week have a FTE of 1.0. It's used very extensively throughout the budgeting process as well. So the example that we actually included in the definition, if someone works half-time, which is 20 hours a week, they have a FTE of 5.0. Again, these are just to provide clarifications to current practices. It does not change the practice that's in existence today. The next is a definition of immediate family. You will notice that we have expanded the definition of immediate family in the personnel rules. This is consistent with common business practices throughout the community. It is also consistent with the benefits in which we provide to our union employees. Immediate family, as it's defined here, has one relevant place in the personnel rules, and that deals with bereavement leave. Yes.
Mr. Trainee has a question.
Line 38, same-sex domestic partner as identified by MOA. How does MOA identify that or define that?
What happened, do you want to take this one, Ken, or do you want me to? Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
The same-sex domestic partner rules are primarily a benefits derived concept, and it requires we have a form affidavit that the employee has to fill out and has to be, they go through all the steps to demonstrate that the individual is their same-sex domestic partner. And once they do that, it meets both the provisions of the Alaska Supreme Court and our benefits plans.
What about if they're domestic partners but not of the same sex?
That,
Are they being discriminated against because they're not of the same sex? I want to make sure we're not discriminating against homosexual couples that are living together the same as same-sex couples are living together.
If you're talking about a same-sex couple that is in a relationship that they're willing to fill out the affidavit, they fall in this category.
What if they're not a same-sex couple,
If they're-
opposite sex?
The Supreme Court addressed that, and if they're unmarried, they're not eligible for the benefits, and they don't fall in the immediate family
They
definition.
discriminate against unmarried individuals living together.
That would be what the Supreme Court has acknowledged, yes.
Can we change that for our perspective and allow it to go to non-married, opposite-sex couples living together?
I suppose you could. I know no legal prohibition against that.
Okay, thank you.
What about common law marriage? Is there a recognition of that?
Common law marriages, I don't believe are recognized in Alaska.
No? Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So, again, in summary, we have expanded the definitions. We have expanded the definitions consistent with common business practice as well as the collective bargaining agreements. And again, this pertains primarily, if not exclusively, to bereavement leave. Under FMLA, family medical leave, there is a definition of family, and that does not apply. I did do a search on this, and I believe that the only place that immediate family is applicable in the personnel rules is in terms of bereavement leave.
Madam Chair,
Ms. Drummond?
didn't we make an exception to immediate family when the fire chief was promoted?
There was, if I may, we have nepotism rules that are contained in the personnel rules. The Assembly made an action that did affect the nephews, I believe.
It was a waiver.
Expanded that,
It was a waiver.
right, as a waiver, as part of the nepotism waiver. correct.
So immediate family also applies in the nepotism rules, not just bereavement. Right?
Different
This
definition.
definition.
I believe there's a different definition.
Or is there a
of
different
that.
definition?
I believe there's a different definition.
Well, I guess that's an
Yeah, we'll look-
inconsistency that
we'll-
we need to address. Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay, pay enhancement, again, we refer to factored rate of pay is your base rate of pay. With the pay enhancement, this clarifies what we were referring to as pay enhancements. Seniority is a new definition to the person, or seniority is a revised definition to the personnel rules. It clarifies that seniority means the date of hire or rehire with no break in service for seniority purposes, and goes on to further clarify that the employee with the longest continuous service shall be first in seniority. Most of the collective bargaining agreements define seniority, so their contracts are not silent, and this would not apply to that. But this specifically, as it relates to the personnel rules and non-reps, it clarifies what seniority is and how it is calculated. We then added a definition of a seniority list. Again, this is consistent with mostly employment practices for if and when we have layoffs, when we recall people back. The personnel rules does not, to my knowledge, have provisions that include things such as overtime is assigned based on seniority, or leave vacation is based on seniority. It has more to do with when layoff and recall provisions come into play.
Can I elaborate one thing on the pay enhancements? We define pay enhancements. We struggled over this because many of the ones that are listed here aren't even in the personnel rules. But when you go back and you look at one of our goals here, it was to create a foundation for the negotiation of future labor contracts. This is inclusive of all the pay enhancement programs that we currently have in the municipality, regardless of bargaining group. And we also incorporated with this the provision that there might be future enhancements that might come up. But that's why there was a laundry list here as opposed to some sort of a general reference to incentive programs.
The next category is performance appraisals. You may or may not know that the municipality was subject to a class action lawsuit that had a direct link to the timely completion of performance evaluations. In particular for non-represented employees, if you did not receive your performance evaluation timely, your merit increase or your next anniversary pay step increase would be withheld until that was completed. As a result of the class action lawsuit, the legal department worked with the courts and determined what would be an acceptable provision to allow us to do this. And in essence, the change says, absent a timely performance evaluation on the date that it is due, we presume that the performance is satisfactory and the employee will receive their anniversary merit increase on the next full pay period. That keeps us out of trouble with the Fair Labor Standards Act, the FLSA, the Department of Labor. So this is something that will help to prevent the likes of a class action lawsuit, the Kempton class action lawsuit that we already had to come forward.
It does not, however, minimize the importance and significance of employees getting a timely performance evaluation. They deserve it, we owe it to them, we need to be doing it timely. This is more of a safety net associated with any potential financial liabilities that might be accrued.
Ms. Johnson?
With that being said, do you have anything in place with the personnel department so it clicks it off and alerts and people are in place to do the performance? So there's
Not
a safety net you kind of...
Not as effectively as we would like. We have sort of the twinkle in of our eye is to be able to send managers an email at the beginning of every month saying the following employees are due for their evaluation this month, to give them more feedback. I mean, I don't think that we are currently using technology to the extent that we can in terms of trying to do a safeguard there. Right now it's up to the departments to track performance evaluation due dates.
If I could add to that, Ms. Johnson, if I understood your question, there's a part of it that said, is there a way to track when their merit anniversary date comes around and to make sure they get that payment? Is that?
No, it's more just, now that you've got the safety net, is there anything to encourage the directors to follow through on their performance?
Yeah.
That's where she was going.
That becomes a performance issue for the manager.
Exactly.
The next item that we made a change to is the grievance procedure. And the grievance procedure applies only to non-represented employees. All of the collective bargaining agreements have a grievance procedure that is inclusive in their collective bargaining agreements. The grievance procedure...
Mr. Quinn?
These are done with this explanation.
Oh, okay. On the grievance procedure, what had happened is over time, the language has become...
I'm sorry, just a minute. Mr. Traney, too.
Just back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, is PeopleSoft designed so you can add that criteria a couple months before their anniversary date. PeopleSoft will kick out a message to the employer.
Unfortunately, the answer to that is currently no. But it is something that we, as I say, that we have on our list of things to try and develop, and I think that it'll be, it was one of the things on our business requirements with the ERP program to make sure that we have a much better system for sending alerts, both to management and employees.
When you're doing that, see if you can come up with a system that gives a 6-month notification so the employer can meet with the individual to let them know how they're doing 6 months into the year. And then before the yearly evaluation kicks out, the computer tells them, oh, by the way, you've got to do this for your employee. That way the person knows half a year into it, just a quick perspective on how their employer thinks they're doing their job. If you would, please, as you're addressing it. That's all, thank you.
Mr. Flynn, did you want to wait till after grievance procedure?
Yes, I'd like to ask about that once she's explained it.
Okay, go ahead.
And I'll go through the quick overview, and then I will actually probably defer the specific questions to Mr. Ford, who was very instrumental in these changes. From the employee relations perspective in administering the non-rep grievance process, each and every time we got a grievance, it was challenging for our staff to figure out what the language said, what was the process, and I can tell you it was even more challenging for the non-rep employees. Rarely did we have a non-rep employee who filed a grievance that was compliant with the language in the personnel rules. So our goal here was to clarify and simplify so that when employees, non-rep employees do find themselves in a situation where they do believe that they have a valid grievance, that there was an easier way for them to bring it forward in a manner which we weren't constantly telling them, you're not following the directions, you need to take 3 steps back and take a left turn and go around the corner, so that it was very clear to everyone involved, as well as for the employee relations staff. As I said, it was challenging for us. I finally made a cheat sheet, so when I got one, I could have layman terms as to how it was supposed to be done. So the process here was intended to simplify and clarify and make it more present day current.
Mr. Flynn?
On page 7, lines 36 through 43, it provides the director shall provide the employee with a list of the names of at least 3 local arbitrators. That kind of bothers me in that there's no check and balance as to who's being chosen as an arbitrator. There are, not that an arbitrator would be particularly biased one way or the other, but some people may have some preconceived notions. Is there any way to structure that so there's some sort of a qualifying standards for someone to be on the arbitrator list for the city and then have some sort of rotation? There's some balance.
Let me go back. First of all, this is a process that has been in effect for many, many years, and it used to be a list of 5 arbitrators, we reduced it to 3. You know, there's really no benefit having a longer list. But I will say that from both the employee's perspective and the municipality's perspective, there's a real benefit to having a qualified arbitrator here, because neither side wants to have an off-the-wall decision, but you want to have a decision that's pretty good. And our history has been that we've had very good people who served as arbitrators. Recent examples are Bob Landau, who's actually now a member of the committee, but he still conducts these for us. Lee Holland, who is...
I'm not questioning the qualifications of the arbitrators that you've chosen in the past. I'm saying there's no definition of who is a qualified arbitrator in here. And there's no provision that allows for some rotation of who those arbitrators are to the employee to prevent the city from selecting the same 3 every time because they think they'll get a favorable decision from one of those 3.
And if I could help, or maybe a little bit, the school district allows the administration to pick one, the employee to pick the other, and the third one has to be mutual agreement.
We'll have 1 arbitrator, though, as opposed to a panel of 3.
Okay.
So that's different for us. There are, with some of our union contracts, for example, we do have standing panels of arbitrators. That tends to get set in stone, and if you end up with a bad arbitrator, I can think of some examples of that, it's very difficult to change that. Obviously, if the bad arbitrator from our perspective, the other side doesn't want to change it, and vice versa.
But I think I see where you're going with this, and that is, what are the qualifications of the other? Do they have to be a member of AAA? Do they have to be, what are the requirements in terms of their qualifications? And I think we could include something like that says that the list of arbiters will be developed from among.
Yeah, that's step 1, but the other step is I want to make sure we're not always picking the same 3 to our advantage, or we're not picking 2, 3 to our advantage.
I would comment on this, that part of the dilemma with this is finding someone who is available to do it within the timeline that we have. I mean, we've had circumstances where unfortunately grievances and notifications have dragged on for 6 months, waiting to get somebody's schedule available. So while I think for a rotation is a good idea, as long as we have some sort of proviso in there that says based on availability or something like that.
So if you develop a list of whoever's qualified based on AAA or whatever, send a note to all of them, say who's available for such and such a date, and maybe present that list to the employee. I don't care how you do it, I just don't want to always be the same ones, because that creates a perceived imbalance in the process.
Let's take a look at that and see if we can't nail something down that would still be enforceable. That's a good suggestion.
Ms. Gray Jackson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the same subject, in my opinion, and I feel really strongly about this, there needs to be a mutual agreement, period, when choosing an arbitrator. Okay, the employee and the municipality, there needs to be an agreement on the arbitrator that's selected. Thank you, Madam Chair.
If I could respond to that? Actually, the way it works right now is we present the list of arbitrators to the employee, and the employee picks
The way it works right now.
Right.
Right.
And the employee has the opportunity, and often does, go out and do their own background check on the arbitrator.
Right, but unless I'm reading something wrong, I think that changes.
They still have, the employee still will select the arbitrator from the list that we provide them.
Well, and if I might, I think.
Okay,
Just a minute, Paul, you're next.
thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, we're working with the S version, which, I really haven't had a chance to look at, so I just want to make sure that my point is clear.
Yes, it says that the employee then has 7 calendar days when receiving the list to select an arbitrator from that list.
Why don't you,
Okay.
can you give the line, page
Oh,
line?
that's page
Page
7, line
I see.
30, 9 and 40.
I see, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you,
sorry.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Holman?
Well, and I think, I echo Mr. Flynn's sentiment, and I think Mr. Garcia is actually addressing part of it. I think a statement needs to be made realistically, and maybe it's, we can sit here all day long and talk about, well, one side likes one arbitrator better than another. We have a list of certified persons who are certified to do these type of tasks, and the list is larger. I think it lessens the chance of having someone not available. And giving a list that's approved by the municipality seems to be biased walking in the door. So a list that's agreed upon before we compile the list, or as we compile the list, it eliminates the issue. And I guess what I'm saying is that perhaps we need to, I know this applies to non-reps, perhaps there's some other language in contracts that already address arbitration and how they're selected, as you alluded to.
We'll take a look at it,
Okay.
see if
And I thought I
we
heard
can
you
do a
say that.
better idea of defining that. As you know, one of the limitations is the universe of potential arbitrators, qualified arbitrators in Alaska is relatively limited, and the expense becomes prohibitive if you go outside the state. So, but we'll certainly take a look at that and see if we can.
Ms. Gray Jackson again, and then Ms. Drummond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm on page 7, looking at number 4. Okay, the 7 days. So, in other words, if the employee misses the deadline, they're just SOL?
They have an option, may I respond? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
There is an option, if the employee is having trouble responding, for example, they can certainly request an extension of that time.
Okay.
And there's never been an opportunity where we failed to work cooperatively with the employee.
Okay, so if they miss the deadline, then we'll be given another opportunity to,
If they
for what missed the deadline for whatever reason, you know what I mean? What if they can't find some representation for themselves? Like if they want to get an attorney, and they're having a difficult time with that, and then the deadline's here, and it's,
that's a good point. We certainly don't operate from a gotcha basis on this.
Of course not.
But the fact is that there are times when a grievance is threatened or is submitted, and then nothing more happens. The employee loses interest at that point.
I think the purpose here is to try and keep the process moving so it doesn't drag on inordinately for either side of the issue. But to Ken's point, an employee would simply call up and request an extension. I suppose that we could write into this that, an extension could be considered. I would be a little bit reluctant to say that we would automatically approve an extension because it depends a lot on what the circumstances are. But I can't think of a time that we haven't.
I'm also not aware of any grievance procedure that does not have timelines in it. Every grievance procedure that I'm aware of does have timelines that are presented so that, again, you bring the issue forward in a timely manner, so that we can address it in a timely manner. And I will say that historically, I cannot recall a time if a request for an extension was requested timely, that it was not granted. Because if you don't grant an extension, they're just going to file the grievance. And so the extension provides you the opportunity to give a grace period for the parties to look more closely into the issue, and it actually prevents a number of grievances. Now, notice that I said as long as the request is brought forth timely. We've had individuals that have requested extensions 30 days after it is timed out. We're not inclined to give an extension for something that's already timed out.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Drummond?
Does this still apply to non-rep employees? Because we moved from the grievance definitions into arbitration.
This is the non-rep procedure. The arbitration procedure for the union employees is specified in their collective bargaining. So this is the non-rep procedure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so then we jump forward to page.
Okay, can I throw something in here about that, because you're talking about the contracts, and I meant to preface this with this comment, I think everybody knows this, but the changes to these personnel rules, as you know, all of our union contracts, where their contract is silent, it defaults to personnel rules. It's the personnel rules that are in place at the time their contract is ratified. So changes to these personnel rules will not affect the union contract at all until their contracts are renegotiated. And at that time, they would have the ability to negotiate those items that they may not like in here. So,
Thank you, that's helpful.
yeah, I'm sorry, I meant to say that at the very beginning, because I think there's been some misunderstanding about this. This doesn't have any impact at all on current union contracts.
So next we jump to page 9, which is length of service. And the change to length of service is consistent with the assembly guidance that was provided to the municipality in AR 2010-86. That AR was in particular to collective bargaining guidance. One of the items in that AR asked us to eliminate longevity service recognition programs. So what we are doing in length of service is we are grandfathering all existing municipal employees to be eligible for service recognition, but no new employee hired after July 1st, 2011 will be eligible for service recognition pay upon achieving the milestone. So any current employee, let's say that I am a union employee today and I have never been a non-represented employee, and I promote 6 months from now from a union position to a management position, I am eligible for service recognition because it's based on your date of hire, not the date that you become a non-represented or a union employee. So this impacts no existing employees, and it will only impact any employee hired or rehired after July 1st, 2011. It's very similar to what we did when the longevity program was sunset. We grandfathered all existing programs, and we do still have a handful of employees in the longevity program. This is the same thing that we are doing with service recognition, and again, it is consistent with the guidelines that were given to us for collective bargaining agreement.
Ms. Grayjack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions, and you may have answered it, but if you did, just tell me. Are there going to be any other incentives? Because, new hires aren't going to be eligible, so what other incentives are there going to be to help keep good employees?
There are a number of provisions in the personnel rules to provide incentives for performance, for bonuses, the employee incentive program. I think the challenge with service recognition is that it rewards employees strictly based on tenure. And it's a concept that really has run its course in current employment markets.
Right.
So there continue to be incentives for performance. There are incentives for, as I say, under the employee incentive program that rewards contributions. But the additional salary just based on being in the job for a long time
Right.
is what.
Right. And one other comment, Madam Chair, if I may. When I was a municipal employee, I was really, I was non-rep and executive, and I was so happy after union contracts were negotiated because I usually got what they got, and it was fair. And I see that not occurring based on some issues in this ordinance. Union folks are getting one thing and non-reps are getting something else when they used to be pretty darn comparable, and I really don't think that that's fair. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Would you like me to respond or was it just a comment?
I'm sorry?
Was that just a comment or?
It was a
you want
comment,
to compensate?
it was a comment, and I don't really think there's anything you can say at this point, so we'll talk more. Thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Back to, specifically to the change in service recognition, I can say that it is consistent with a recent change in the most recent contract that we did negotiate, and that was the IBEW, what is known oftentimes as the mechanic group of IBEW. We did eliminate service recognition, and I can tell you there was no other performance program that was brought in its place.
And so this contract, if I may, Madam Chair, wasn't ratified by us yet, so we don't.
No, the IBEW it was ratified
Oh,
in
wait a
2000.
minute, the contract, not a side letter, okay.
No, the contract, yeah,
Okay.
that was, remember the brand new contract
No,
that we
I
negotiated?
remember,
Yeah.
I was thinking of side letters now, and
Yeah.
everything has come to us.
Yeah,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I would just remind you that the guidance that we got from the Assembly on the collective bargaining guidance, which is essentially the framework that we're applying on, that came in February, March of 2010, and that's what we are following in terms of giving us direction.
Thank you.
Moving on to page 10, this is the change that Nancy indicated that we have struck, and that is modifying the standby pay, so you'll see bold that's struck. That was our initial change, and now it's being redacted. We do clarify that no employee shall be on standby unless scheduled by such by the MOA. An employee cannot self-proclaim that they're on standby or that they're available for calls. Again, that's more clarification than anything. Next, we go into section 9, which defines working hours, shifts, and work weeks. I will also tell you that the language that appeared in this section probably caused the most confusion outside of the grievance process for both supervisors, managers, and employees. And oftentimes we were asked questions about being able to temporarily change schedules. An example would be, we have routine maintenance on our IT systems. We know that the third Thursday of every month, we need to have and schedule staff to come in at a different time. Can supervisors and managers schedule their staff for predictable, reoccurring type events so that we can meet our operational needs? This language, much of the language did come from collective bargaining agreements, again, to provide the same sort of continuity to where, yes, we can change schedules for operational and business purposes, but we must give notice. I don't want to come up to Ken and say, Ken, tonight you're going to stay late. And Ken says, well, I had a ballet recital to go to. Sorry, you're staying late. Instead, is to say, Ken, next 2 Thursdays from now or 2 days from now, we're going to need to do this. So it provides clarification that, yes, we do have the ability to change schedules for business purposes. We also owe it to the employees to give them proper notice for short-term changes and even more notice for long-term changes. If I'm switching someone permanently from days to nights, I need to give them proper notice so that they can make family arrangements.
That's for my daughter, right?
No, Ken.
Where does it say that we have to give them notice?
Okay, that is going to be on page 12, section 11, for temporary schedule changes B, lines 33 through 35. Talks about the short 1-2 time hits. And then when we are making changes to regular schedules, which is down in section 12, it does refer to, if I'm looking, it's current language, at least 1 week's notice of change, and if possible 2 weeks with the exception, and that's existing language on page 13, lines 3 through 5.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're moving on to page 13, and this is the change that we are making to the leave donation. Most of you probably are familiar with the situation with our leave donation. We actually received a number of grievances and in relation to how the municipality handled leave donations. The IRS came out with a uniform leave donation policy. And in essence, what it says is if you have a uniform leave donation policy, it allows the employer to tax the recipient of the leave donation and doesn't require us to tax the donor and or both. So this change here says we are adopting a uniform leave donation policy that is consistent with the IRS letter rulings. And then each union that would like to opt in and sign a letter of agreement, which will then be brought forward to this body for approval, will be able to opt in to a uniform leave donation policy. Many times people get frustrated because they want to, they're good natured and they say, I want to help a fellow colleague out and donate leave. And then we get the call saying, what? I got taxed for it? So this will allow the unions also to opt into our programs, to the Uniform Leave Donation Program, to allow the recipient, when they actually use the leave, to receive the tax burden rather than the donor and or the recipient. For those unions that choose not to opt in, after this has been approved, then what will happen is just the recipient, or excuse me, the donor will continue to be taxed. So there's no requirement of the union to opt into this. I can't tell you that while I was here, many of the unions have come forward and said, we're very eager for this to go through so that we can opt in. So this will be sort of a domino effect. If this is approved, there will probably be a number of letter of agreements that are coming forward to this body that allow the unions to opt into this language.
Mr. Flynn?
I believe when we discussed this in our, whatever it was, committee, you mentioned there was a grievance currently that this addresses. Which bargaining unit was that with?
We have a number of grievances on leave donation right now.
If I can comment on this, the genesis of the original grievances that came in were because the former CFO had made a determination based on this IRS ruling that without the uniform policy, without uniform leave donation policy, that there was a requirement to tax both parties, the recipient and the donor, in the transaction. The original grievances came in associated with the double taxation issue. And we started looking at it, we made a determination that we think that while that was a legitimate position to take based on the ruling from the IRS, it's changeable, and that it would go to the donor. I mean, right now it would go to the donor. With the uniform policy, we can do this. So, as Lisa said, at the end of this, it would be only one party gets taxed. Whether it's the donor or the recipient depends on whether you're a party to the uniform leave donation policy. And I think we dealt with AMEA, I think we have one from APDEA, and
Fire one maybe too.
Fire too, yeah. So,
I apologize, Madam Chair. One of the, I don't remember which, but one of the bargaining units contacted me and they didn't like this change for some reason, but I don't remember. Yeah, go ahead, Paul, if you remember.
Well, from my experience having, in donating some leave time from when I worked for the city full-time, my understanding was that the leave hours are just a number that's transferred, but until it's used, until it's utilized, cashed in for money or used for a day that they're not at work and they're getting paid for it, that's when it's supposed to get taxed. Why would, I mean, that's the way it is. I mean, if I had leave and I continued my leave year after year, I didn't get taxed on leave I didn't take. So why would you even think about taxing something that you're not taking? Until it's used, is what I'm
Sure.
saying.
Okay, first of all, we don't transfer hours to hours. What we do is, let's say that I make $10 an hour and you make $20 an hour, and I donate 8 hours of leave to you. They do a conversion where there's actually a cash value attached to that. So while I think it is very common for people to think, oh, I'm getting hours, no, you're actually receiving the benefit of the leave you accrued, but rather than taking a day off, what you're saying is, I'm giving it to you. And so it is not, oh, I'm giving 8 hours to you and you get 8 hours. Likewise, if you were to give 8 hours to me, I'd actually get the value of 16 hours based on our current rates of pay. So I think the state actually does an hour-for-hour thing, which is somewhat different, but the municipality has always done a conversion of the number of hours equal a value, and that value is transferred and then converted back to hours.
But it seems that, and I'm on the KISS principle, it seems that's a more complicated way of looking at it, because what if, I'm just going to hypothetical here, what if I donate 10 hours to a person and 20 other people donate 10 hours to the same person and they used 80 hours instead of 100? Then those 20 hours that are unused, where do they go? And now we got to go back and undo that same conversion, and then who gets taxed for that?
the way leave is donated is on a per pay period basis.
Right.
It's intended to keep the individual in a paid status. So if I'm out on leave and people, because they love me, give me 200 hours of leave, they only process it on a per pay period basis. So only 80 hours come into my bank at a time. And then let's say that I was out for illness and I was miraculously healed and I came back after 80 hours, the rest is never transferred. It stays in your bank and doesn't come out of your bank.
Well, I know my wife works for the federal government, they have a leave donor program too, and I believe it goes hour for hour, so.
I think that there's a lot of variation in
Yeah.
how various leave donation programs work. This speaks, I mean, the mechanics of it aren't affected by this. This has to do with the taxation and getting the donation.
It just seems like if you had an hour donation and it converted to an hour donation, and at the time it's used, the donor or the recipient is responsible for the taxation on it. And if it doesn't get used, it goes back to the person who donated it, and it's a wash until they use it, and then they're taxed on it. That just seems like a fairly simple process. That's my thought. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Go
I'll
ahead.
make a note to mention it to the CFO because tell you the
I'm
truth.
sorry.
it's
Would you- Just a second.
Yeah,
Ms. Drummond?
I'm sorry, I'm looking at the leave conversion and cash-in section, right, on
Can you
page
give me a
13.
page and line number?
Page 13, 11, line 11. That's what we've been talking about, is this section.
Oh, leave cash-in is different. Leave cash-in refers to, under the personnel rules, there is a cap. The most an employee can carry over from year
Wait,
to year.
Stop. I thought, I heard you talking about the IRS rules.
Mhm.
Where are they mentioned in this document?
I
In the
will-
S version.
Okay, what I will tell you is the language, the new language that is in the letter D is out of the uniform leave donation policy. DNS in the municipal attorney's office worked very closely with Chuck Dunnigan, who represents multiple unions. We also worked with Will Aitchison, who represents the Anchorage Police Department Employees Association, and Justin Roberts, I hope I got his name right, Justin Roberts, who is the legal counsel for IBEW. This was a very collaborative approach to look at the IRS letter ruling, to look at the language, and to put together something that complies with that. So,
I think she wants to know where it is.
Right, I was gonna say, that if I can respond to that, the policy itself isn't associated with the IRS. This is essentially a variation on the model language that was provided by the IRS. The tax policy associated with the IRS original ruling is a policy that is essentially owned by the CFO's office. They make a determination of what the tax ramifications are. So it's not something we would put in a
And that's,
procedural.
and this is the language in section D, line 30, page 13.
Right, that
Okay, that
that
begins on
satisfies
line
the
30.
uniform leave donation policy, correct.
Okay.
so I'm trying to be sensitive to time, and we have 10 minutes and still a number of issues to get through. So I just wanted to keep everyone aware of the time. Okay, so the next item that we are looking at then is on
13.
page 15. This is cleanup language. It removes reference to paid time off. The municipality doesn't have PTO time and has not had PTO time for a number of years, so this is just cleanup language. Okay. So again, the removal on page 16 of D, we have not had PTO and no employees currently have any PTO on the books. Next, we go into injury leave. Let me refresh my memory briefly. One of the things that this does is you may recall that many of the collective bargaining agreements and the personnel rules had a supplemental injury leave payment. And in essence, what that did is if an employee went out on workers' compensation did their formula to determine what the employee was eligible to receive. And then the municipality had language that said, on top of that, if it's not 80% of your income, we will pay the difference. What we have found is that over time, workers' comp, I know people oftentimes disagree with me when I say that, but they are at a place today where they are compensating most employees in most circumstances appropriately. So workers' compensation today pays 80% of an employee's income. There is a cap, and so when I said most employees in most situations, I believe the cap is today, it's either like $1,081 or $1,060 something per week. So there is the rare occasion where if someone was above that, that injury leave would still kick in. What we did is that we had an audit a number of years ago, and it was a nightmare to go back and collect money that was overpayment to individuals. And so what we found is that most people, there's a very few individuals that actually qualify for supplemental injury leave. So the complaint that we had actually been hearing from individuals is I go out and I get hurt on the job, and then I come back to work. So from a workers' compensation perspective, I'm not receiving time loss benefits anymore because I'm back light duty or I'm back full duty. Well, if I'm back light duty, I still have medical appointments that I have to go to. Physical therapy, follow-up, whatever it is. The employees, workers' comp doesn't cover that time anymore because you're not in time loss. And we said, you have to take annual leave to go to your medical appointment. There's nothing that allows us to pay for that. So what we did is sort of a trade-off here. We took away the supplemental injury leave, and we replaced it with language that says that an employee who returns to duty, this is on page 18, an employee who is returned to duty may attend medical appointments during work with no more than 2 hours per week, including travel time, for 1 year from date of original injury. And they shall not be charged for those hours of leave. Instead, it will be paid time. So yes, this provision is a little bit of give and a little bit of take, but it was based a lot on feedback that we had heard from employees.
Continue.
Okay. Then I'm going to jump forward to page 19, bereavement leave. It's semantics, but today not all families choose to have a funeral. They may want to honor their loved ones in a different way. So what we have done is we have replaced funeral leave with bereavement leave. And again, we also expanded previously the definition of immediate family so that an employee is eligible to receive 3 days for a maximum of 18 hours for bereavement leave. Okay. That's it.
Go ahead, Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What about folks who have family that live out of town? 3 days really, like me, you know, if I was an employee, I live in, well, my family's in New Jersey. Takes a day to get there, a day to get back. 3 days is not enough.
In some situations, for the people that are here in town, they may not need 3 days. For those that travel out, I have yet to come across a department director who is not willing to grant additional annual leave to an individual that is going back or something like that.
Okay, so they don't get bereavement leave like some of the union members do, 4 days. They just get 3 periods. If they want to take an extra time, they're on their own.
Correct.
This is,
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to have quite a few more questions, and I know that we don't have enough time, so I'll just submit them and hopefully get answers by Tuesday.
Through Nancy.
yeah,
Right,
oh
right.
yeah, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Shoot it to
Thank
me
you,
and
Madam
we'll,
Chair.
we'll get back, the sooner I get them, the sooner I can get back to you.
Is there a time requirement on this?
Well, it's scheduled for our agenda on Tuesday, so as soon as you can. And
Okay.
if we can't get it done, then I guess we can postpone it or continue it. But the goal is to vote on it on Tuesday.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Flynn?
I'm sure if you, well, the indulgence, appreciate the representative from the non-reps to come forward just for a moment.
I think she's talking to, I think he's talking to you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Jacqueline Smith, the Human Resources Advisory Board. She doesn't represent the nine
She's
months.
a board-
She's our public,
I'm sorry,
our
miss-
private sector.
I apologize, I misunderstood.
No problem.
Do we have a representative from the non-rep committee that,
Not with the non-reps, but with the unions. If possible, I'd like to take a moment to talk to the assembly.
At this point, our understanding is this is not impacting unions at all.
well,
If you think that
sort
it
of
does.
does, so, I mean, it will in the next round of
Well, it's
negotiations.
up to you, Mr. Flynn.
Where
if
it's
you'd
not
like to
silent,
hear it.
where the contracts are silent.
I'm sorry, Mr. Flynn has the floor.
Yeah, if you have a quick comment, I'm happy to hear it. We can discuss it further on the floor Tuesday.
Appreciate the opportunity. First of all, my name is Greg Walker. I'm with Business Manager with Local 367 of Plumbers and Pipe Fitters. I'm also here to represent the Municipal Coalition of Unions, which consists of all the unions. We have several concerns about the proposed change to that are before us today. I was real happy to hear that a lot of those concerns were addressed, specifically the grievance procedure. Many of the items that I wanted to bring up today have been brought up by the Assembly members. I appreciate that. one of the things I'd like you to consider in regards to the grievance process is we're talking about neutrality and wanting a level of fairness. And if we change the language to say that the employee had the opportunity to select 3 arbitrators, it might put a different perspective or spin on how the fairness would be played. I know you talked about it. I'll leave it with that. We had a couple other issues. Full-time equivalency. If you take a look at the proposal, if you don't mind, section 1, line number 27, the word normally is in there. Normally works a 40-hour work week. I guess I have concern about normally. What happens if the full-time work week is less than 40 hours and it's 36 and a half or something like that? As a union member and representing unions, I think this document is being presented as not affecting the unions. But again, it might, because where our union contracts are silent, personal rules do apply. Our concern is that mandatory subjects of bargaining may be eliminated. You know, that's mandatory subject of bargaining on wages, benefits, working conditions. A couple other issues that we wanted to talk about.
We're really short on time. We got
Okay.
about 2 or 3 minutes.
The leave donation. You talked about the leave donation. I appreciate the comments that were made. Again, there's still an issue of double taxation. Currently, both the donor and the recipient are being taxed for leave, and that's a major concern of ours. I appreciate the time.
Okay. What would help us all is if you could find specific concerns that you have and email it to us so we can all get them, and then maybe we can fix it.
I'd be happy to.
By Monday?
Yes, sir.
Soon.
I know, but I want no later than Monday, because on Tuesday, this is coming up for hearing, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Trini, do you have a question? And
That
I'll go
was
back
it.
to Nancy. Very good.
I was just going to say two quick recap is that I did have on the cover sheet here, and I want to mention that the personnel rules are procedural rules and policies associated with non-represented employees. It is 3.70, the Employee Relations Ordinance, that governs all of the parameters, it sets the framework for our collective bargaining environment. So that sets forth the rules for that. And just as a comment, and I suppose this is a little bit editorial, and that is the reason that we have 9 different bargaining units is because different employee groups have different needs. And each of the contracts is adapted to the needs of that particular group. The plumbers are different from IBEW, are different from AMEA and office workers. So our contracts and our personnel rules recognize the differences between the groups. This does, and I can tell you that there was a lot of discussion about this is consistent with the direction that we were given from the Assembly. The question is, do we wait until after the round of negotiations with unions and then do this in sort of following, or is it appropriate to make the changes that we think are appropriate now to the non-rep workforce, using that as somewhat of a template, following the guidance that the Assembly has given us for contracts going forward? And that's what we're trying to do this in concert. So,
Thank you. Thank you. Has everybody got copies of the substitute version of the ordinance that you want them? And
I did send them out to all
Okay.
of the unions and the Assembly and all of the directors
And
yesterday.
Amanda, could you check that it's available online? Okay, to make sure. And if you send in comments to us, it's very helpful if you can specify exactly what section concerns you.
Page
Thank
and
you.
line.
Yeah, that helps us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
With that, we finished exactly on time. Did you have anything you wanted to say, Ken?
No, I'm impressed.
All right, we have one more work session right after this one, if you can stick around.